Tennessee. Hi, everybody. My name is Diane Allison from Nashville, Tennessee. A grateful member of the Worldwide Fellowship of Al-Anon. And I am so grateful to be here. Wow, what a wonderful weekend it's been. I mean, so far, just the whole kickoff, Mike and Renee, Steve, you guys just set the bar really high for me. But all I got to do is tell my Al-Anon story. I'm so grateful, Jimmy and Mary Beth, thank you for asking us, the committee, thank you for everything you do. I know what it takes to put on something like this, and also Roger for taping this so that I can take it back to my people. You know, I love AA. I am an Al-Anon, but I'm sorry, I leak a lot, so as people say, and the tears are going to come. AA has given us your program. You know, they have given us so much with these steps, traditions. I love going to AA meetings. I love hearing the story. You give me the insight. If you're an Al-Anon and have not been to open AA speaker meetings, I encourage you to do so. That's where I found compassion for the alcoholics in my life. It's where I could see inside them that I couldn't see inside my own alcoholic and stuff that was living within me. And I just came to understand a whole lot more. And, you know, Mike and we were at a conference one time and somebody said that Al-Anon is just Team Xerox with a dry copy of AA. And I get it. You know, you talk about that self-centered, you talk about your fears, not belong, all those, I get it. I'm there too. You know, I do associate with that. I just don't get the drinking part. That just doesn't make sense. You know, Steve talked about it, what you get from the alcohol, that ease and comfort. I get that, but I stop when I get that. I don't continue on. I don't need to go beyond anything else. I came in here in 1990 and never had the need to leave. There was always something keeping me here, and I know what it was. You know, my higher power, because I need to continue to grow every day. Life happens to me. I'm wake up breathing, and that means I need to be here. I'm just so grateful to be here, and we were here in 2019. Mike shared on a step, and I got to come and meet so many people. You know, I just love seeing these people again, and when I go to conferences like this, I just want to say, I'm here with my family, you know? Like was talked about, Bob talked about it, how, you know, we're all really one. We're all connected by that one mind. And when people say, what do you do when you go do that? Don't you love to go see the places? I said, no, I love to see the people. It's about the people. It's about y'all. You get us, you know, you understand us. Some people don't understand us and they don't get it. And so, you know, I just love AA and Al-Anon and Alateen. I'm so grateful my kids got to grow up in Alateen. We got to be a recovering family. Mike gave me this little thing about the AA and Al-Anon symbols. And I always struggled about, were we the ones in the inside part or the outside circle or whatever? I never could remember that, and I happened to be at a conference last weekend, and there was a newcomer. My host was introducing me to a brand newcomer that had never been to a conference before, and she was explaining, you know, we have the triangle and the circles on the outside for them and the circles on the inside for us. And see, automatically, my higher power kicked in. And because I did not think this, but I said something that just amazed me. I went, wow, where did that come from? And what I told this newcomer was, yeah, the circle's on the outside of them because you can see they're crazies. But it's on the inside for us because you can't see our crazies. You know, That's how I'm going to remember it from now on. Does the circle go inside or outside? It's very clear. But then I had another, while Steve was talking, I was preparing my talk and stuff, so I forget what you said, but it occurred to me again that no, it's not the crazies. Yeah, it is when we came in here. But what it's about, and this is a third step thing, Steve, and it's about now I see God all around you, and I know God is within us. God took away the crazy. It's still there a little bit, but, that's where he put me. He's here now. He's not out there anymore. And that's still God, it's not me. So I always start with a moment of silence and asking my higher power to come into this room so you can get the message, whatever it is he would have you say or hear, whatever I would say and you hear. And I encourage you just to take a moment just to do that, because I've got to take me out of this. Thank you. Okay, I was born and raised in Nashville. I had a wonderful family. I was one of 12, and there were 12 and a half years between the oldest and the youngest. There are 2 sets of twins. I'm one of the sets with a sister, a fraternal sister, and there's another set of twins under me. There's a girl and a boy. My twin and I are numbers 7 and 8. We are the younger 6. They're the older 6, and they're the younger 6. It's just hard to divide us up. So the younger 6 and the older 6, we did things differently. Even though it was like maybe a year apart, it was still, we went by the older 6 and the younger 6. So I felt like I got to be the oldest one of the younger 6. And, for the older 6, we were the babies. And so we were kind of the middle, whatever. And it was 8 girls and 4 boys. Lots of hormones, estrogen. It was a fun time to grow up. I mean, back when we grew up in the 50s and 60s, it was fabulous. We were outside. We were playing in the neighborhood. We didn't come home till dark, whatever it was. Our family was just like any other family around. We played together. We fought together. We argued. We loved on each other. It was wonderful. My dad was strict, and he was the disciplinarian, and he worked really hard to raise the family and keep us together and keep us organized. And with 12 of us, I understand why now. And my mom was just a stay-at-home mom, if you can imagine, and was busy all day long taking care of us or cleaning or laundry or doing whatever it was to try to stay on. I used to say when I first started telling my story was that, I never remember my mom hugging on me. With 12 little ones fighting for it, it's a little hard, with only 2 arms. And, I know she loved me the best way she could, and I believe that she was raised in the family disease of alcoholism. I believe my dad had a little bit of that in his dad also. He was a traveling musician that his mother divorced him when he was only 1 year old, and he grew up as an only child with his grandmother that was very protective and loving and doted on him and just loved him. But I never really knew my grandfather much on that side because he was still a traveling musician, and he traveled around the world. And there was some kind of something going on between my grandmother and my grandfather we never knew of. The secrets were there. And we found out later after she died a lot of stuff. And when my dad was 55 years old, I just share this because I think this is where the disease might show somewhere in his family. Is when he was 55, his father died, and his aunt sent him the obituary, and in the obituary it said survived by son and daughter. And my dad's like, I'm an only child. What are they talking about? Called my aunt and said, what is this? The daughter survived. And he said, oh, well, we never told you. He had another family at the same time, and he called up that sister, and he said, I'm your brother. And they found out they were like a week apart in age. And You know, I think that's why my grandmother divorced him, do you think? But she never knew about my dad, and my dad never knew about her. We had 12 kids. They both were raised as only children, and she had like 10 kids. And it was really good because we got to meet a new family then. And that, I think alcoholism was a part in there. I think my grandmother must have been a good old pre-Al-Anon person. And anyway, I don't know that, but you know, I think there's some kind of a control issue with my dad. That's where I get my control. And my mom grew up with 5 sisters and a brother, 2 brothers, 4 sisters, and there were 6 in his family. 2 brothers. One died at an early age, at age 21, with like leukemia or something, and still has an older brother today that is 94. I've got an aunt that's 99, and they have long genes, but my mother did not live that long. My mother lived at age 64 and died of lung cancer. But fortunately, you know, we had a great relationship today and then. And so anyway, we grew up in that family in strong religious beliefs. We went to parochial schools, 12 years. I went to an all-girls high school, and it was wonderful. I loved it. I loved all the things that they taught me. They gave me a lot of virtues. I lived in fear. Of course, they put that fear of God in me, that if I did anything wrong, that I would go to hell, and I didn't want that, so I was a good girl most of the time. When I thought I could get away with things, I would. I thought I'd be sneaky, you know, God wouldn't see this or whatever, but, you know, I was not perfect. Alcohol was part of our growing up, but never in a negative way. And my dad would come home from work every day, sit down in his lounge. Well, he'd whistle when he got home, and then we all had to come running like the sound of music, and he would tell us what we needed to do, and he would go sit in his lounge chair, and we'd already eaten dinner. He always came home after dinner, and he would sit in his lounge chair. We would come, and he taught us how to fix his drink just how he liked it, and we would turn his TV on because you didn't have remote controls back then. We were the remote control. We had to sit there and kind of change channels for him and all that. But fix his drink, and he'd only have 1 or 2. My dad never saw him drunk. My mom, she, like me, can't handle alcohol in a way that to non-alcoholics. We have 1 or 2 drinks, and that's it, you know. She has 1 or 2, and she gets silly. And that's what I remember. That's all I remember about her. And she would never drink except for like a wedding or a party, a Christmas, some kind of party that they had on the weekend. And my dad did it to come home and relax. So alcohol was fine. I started dating in high school, and alcohol was there were fraternity parties, there were sorority parties, and alcohol was normal. Everybody drank. It wasn't legal, but we all drank anyway. But I didn't see any really bad behavior. People might get sick. I had a couple of people, I remember a sister that was one of my examples, that she would get sick and cry and do all kinds of silly stuff and be embarrassed, and the next day, you know, she'd swear it off, and I always thought, well, I'll never do that, you know, I'm not getting to that point because that's embarrassing. I am such a control freak. I really care about what you think about me, and I don't want to go past that point. So that, you know, that also kept me from drinking a lot, too much. A couple of when I went into college. In college, it was, you know, alcohol, drugs, you name it, it all was out there. All of a sudden, 1970, and it was, everybody was doing it. And I'm one of those people that just goes along with the crowd because I want you to like me, and I'm going to do what you do, usually, unless it's something I think is wrong. I don't like needles, I don't like any of that stuff, and I'm not going to touch that stuff. But, you know, I would do things that I didn't think I would do. You know, when I went to church all the way through high school, and then when I went to college, it was like I knew there was a church there somewhere, but I never opened that door, you know, because once I got out of the household, it was like, I say, you know, somebody opened up that cage and the bird flew out, and I got to go experience life, without any parents, you know. We were under such strict discipline at home, and that it was like, I'm free, you know. I can do what I want. I ended up in college. My twin went to the same college I went to. My 2 older brothers were there, and so it was kind of home. My 2 older brothers were in a fraternity, and my twin and I had been in sororities in high school and decided we didn't want to go to a sorority in college. We wanted to go to a fraternity, so we joined the fraternity. You probably can do that today, too. But then we were little sisters. And that was so much fun. I love being around guys. I'm sorry, I love being around guys. And I would just get off of my class if I went to class. And the bus would drop us off at the fraternity house, and I'd go in and I learned how to play spades and hearts and bridge and learned how to cook. I'd go back in the kitchen, and the cooks would teach me how to cook. And of course, we cooked at home, being one of 14 people. We had to cook at home too, but got to learn all kinds of stuff. I loved going back there and conversing with them and just being with the guys. It was just so much fun. College was a ball for me. I had probably a few examples of I overshot the mark a couple of times, and not like y'all, but I do swear it off, and I won't do that again, and I usually didn't. And so college was great, and I was going to be a teacher. I had this goal set, and I loved children, and I met Mike. A mutual friend introduced us, and we were at opposite ends of the state in college. He was finishing up his 4 years in Memphis, and I was in Knoxville, and I'd only gone 2 years. And when I met him, it was a spring break, and we just really hit it off, and he just kind of checked. I got to check all those boxes of, he was funny, he was musical, he was talented, he was handsome, he was all those good things. And if I look back on my dating history, when you do that inventory and look back at that, I would always find this guy and then find somebody better, then find somebody better and find somebody better. And he was finally it. And I didn't know that at the time, but I thought he was it. And so I traveled to Memphis to see him those last few months of school, and he traveled to Knoxville to see me. And hey, it was perfect. We went home. I quit college. I thought, that's it. I found him. I don't need college anymore. Plus, he's going to be in Nashville, and that's where we both are from. And I didn't know him in Nashville growing up or in high school or anything. And we started dating. And I thought, well, I don't need to go back to college. What do I need that for, I found him. He's got a job. He'll be sufficient. I don't need to finish. I can get a job without doing something different rather than the education. I went to work with my dad in his office. He needed a secretary at the time and somebody to manage his office, and I thought, well, I can do that. That's, my old sponsor used to say, Al-Anons, pre-Al-Anons, or whatever, are great managers. We can manage anything. It's that control thing that we have, and I'm good at that. And plus, I think I can do anything, Teach me how to do it, I can do it. And usually I did, and I didn't have a struggle with learning how to run his office and pay the bills and do all this other stuff I had to do. And it was great, except for I tried to live with my parents for those first couple of months in summer. And after 2 years in college and being on my own, and it was like, going back to grade school or something. It was like, you have these rules and you got to follow my rules and all this stuff. And I was like, no, that's not going to work. As soon as I got my own paycheck, I moved in with my friend who introduced Mike and I. And I was working. I got a car. My dad bought me a car that I paid back him for a little at a time as I got on my paycheck. And I was, all of 19 years old. And I thought, man, I'm grown up. I am so old. I've got a place to myself. I look now at the 19-year-old and I thought, how did I think I was grown up? But I did, and I was self-sufficient at the time, and Mike had his job and was working, and we dated for 2 whole years, and I thought everything was perfect. Now, he said in his talk, we weren't getting along too well. I didn't know that. He forgot to tell me that. All of a sudden, he just said, we're through. And I'm like, what? And see, there were a lot of red flags in those 2 years that were popping up. But see, I'm one of those people that when I see a red flag, I'm going to ask you about it, and you can tell me a lie, and I'm going to believe you. You wouldn't lie to me. Why would you lie to me? And I believed him. And so, it was explainable. I could even explain it away, the red flags. I didn't believe some of the things I was seeing either, I was in such denial about those things and didn't really question them. So at the end of those 2 years, he broke it off with me. And in those years in college, I was a big old hippie and stuff. And I was like, okay, that's fine, que sera, sera. And I'll find somebody else. I'll go up that ladder one more time and find somebody that's, close. I'll keep searching. Because I really did have that little bit of faith that I grew up with, that my higher power, my God at that time was the judgmental God keeping score. And I still believed he had good intentions for me, that there was somebody really out there that I was supposed to meet and I would live happily ever after. So I was going to keep seeking that person, and I continued to date, and I moved in with another friend who was even more partier than what we had been used to, and we partied every weekend because that sister who was my example of what not to do when you're drinking, she moved in with me too. And so, the parties were every weekend, and I knew Mike liked to party. So, I would ask him to the parties. I'd always let him know we were having a party. And I'd always, of course, have a guy there that I'm dating, and he would bring his friends, and as Mike says, I was just reeling him in. And I was playing the game that I think we play unconsciously. I didn't know at the time I'm playing this game, but it's kind of the thing is that he sees me with somebody else, he's going to know he misses me, and what a great thing he's lost, and he's going to come back to me. And that went on for about a year, close to a year, and then I get that call that he talked about and saying that, his office manager called me and said, Mike's had his wisdom teeth out, he needs you to come take care of him, I've got to get back to the office, can you come now? And see, that's the Al-Anon call. I heard that word in there. I heard the word he needed me. Hey, he called me, and he finally got it. I thought, what, okay. He picked up on all those clues I was throwing out there. But, that was it. And so I said, okay, I'll come over there and make some phone calls and get his friends over there while I come back to work and everything. And I told my dad I was heading over to take care of Mike, get some things sorted out for him. And my dad said, wait, didn't you break up with him a year ago? Yeah, but what's that got to do with it, He needs me. I heard it. He didn't say it, the office manager did, but I knew it came from him. So anyway, my dad said, okay. I said, I'll be back in an hour. I'll take it on my lunch break. And I went over and I lined up his friends, and I told him, I'll be back. I'll bring you some dinner later on. If you guys will just take care of him. Till then, I'll come back and take care of him. So I finished work, went home, and told my boyfriend at the time who was living with me in my apartment, I was going to go make a call to Mike and take him some dinner because he'd had his wisdom teeth out and he needed some food. His parents were out of town and couldn't take care of him. And he didn't like that. He kind of knew I used to date Mike. He knew some of that stuff, but he wasn't happy with my decision to go out. And he gave me an ultimatum, which is not what you want to give to me. I'm very strong-willed and stuff, and you give me an ultimatum, I'll show you. And he said, if you go, I won't be here when you come back. See, it was my apartment anyway, so it didn't matter. He wasn't kicking me out or anything. And I said, well, I'm just going for dinner. I will be back in an hour or so. You do what I can't stop you from doing anything. But, that was my out. I went over and took Mike dinner, and he had written on this piece of paper earlier during the day, I love you, I want you back, move in with me, all this stuff. And see, I hadn't been to Al-Anon yet, and I did, and 2 days later, because my boyfriend was gone, and I needed another him. And I just jumped right in there, moved in into his apartment, because I didn't know why we'd broken up. He never told me. And actually, he only told me several years ago when he heard me tell my story on this. He said, you mean I never told you? I said, no, you never told me, and I never asked, I guessed. And it was like, he said, you were too controlling. I went, that's it? That's me, always. Still hadn't changed, but somewhat. But anyway, I moved in with him. My mom got word of it, and somehow, and I said, she asked me, did you move in with Mike? And I said, yeah. At this time, it was 3 years after college and all, and I was almost 25, and I was like, yeah, I did, because, see, we broke up, and I didn't know why. No, I was almost 22. And I said, I don't know why we broke up, and I want to know if we can live together, if this is going to work or not. I want to know if I can live with him or he can live with me, because I don't know. We've never tried this out or anything. And so my mom was very, I think, disappointed at that time, and I used to say she disowned me, but I think I just couldn't show up around the house because it was too hard, for her as a mom. And I get it today. I'm a mom, I know, and I didn't know, but my older sisters told me some things that they'd been through prior to, that she had gone through with them, that she was just trying to spare me any pain that I might go through. That's all. But, God, our perception changes, doesn't it? Anyway, so I moved in with Mike, and my mom's big thing was, he'll never marry you now. He doesn't need to have a piece of paper. And I was like, well, if that's the case, I think I'm going to learn the lesson my own way. You just can't tell me it's not going to work out. I got to find this out for myself. And anyway, 3 months later, we were out, and Mike again was on some kind of whatever, party favors, he calls them. And we were at his dad's farm, and we stopped, and we were at this lovely little pond, and he just looked at me, and he said, will you marry me? And now, he hadn't planned to say that, and I was not expecting it either. It just kind of came out, and we both were kind of in shock that he'd said it. And I just hugged him, and he said, well, is that a yes or a no? And I went, yes. And I thought, now, my dreams are coming true. We're going to get married. Life will be grand. We'll have kids. We'll find that white picket fence, and life will be good. So we set off, got married, and he went and asked my dad's hand in marriage, and everything was good with my mom and I again. Everything was good. I was going to get married, and she helped set it all up, and we got married a few months later. And we started living that wonderful, happy life. And he worked hard, I worked hard. We found a house, a year later. And so we were set, and I thought, okay, it's about time. Let's start a family, because I wanted kids. And I got pregnant with our first son, and he was born, and life was good. Being a mom just was the best thing ever. I love babies, and I still love them today. And 3.5 years later, we had our second son. And all this time, the party favors were getting more and more. The alcohol was getting more and more. I had decided when I was going to be a mom that I wasn't going to be doing any of that stuff. A glass of wine is fine. My OB told me a glass of wine at night to calm down is fine every night. I'm like, okay, but I did. And anyway, it was good. I thought everything was going good, but those flags started popping up again. Those red flags were popping up here and there and there. And I'd question Mike about it, and he'd give me an answer, and I believe him. And eventually, it got to be when I'd say, why were you home late? Or I ran into this person, I ran into that person. Why didn't you call? And the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde started showing up. I never knew who was coming home. And I started making those phone calls. I was the wife that nonstop, several times a day. You didn't have cell phones back then, so I'd call him at the office. I'd call him. He had a phone in his car. Call him in the car so I knew who was coming home, because I wanted to know which Mike was coming home. Was it the hard, stressed, angry Mike, or was it the fun-loving dad Mike? And I would plan my day by that. I would have the kids fed and in front of TV or doing homework or already in bed or something if the angry Mike was coming home. I didn't want them to see that. And he was just under stress, and anything might set him off. So I just wanted to control everything, his emotions, their emotions and everything. And if he was in a really good mood, we'd have family night, game night, card night, whatever it was. We had dinner together. It was really fun. I realized I did that. Didn't know I was actually doing that, but looking back, I did. I really, see, when my son told us that, he was his hero, and when he found out, if you heard our talk yesterday, that he was so confused because he was his hero. They never saw that alcoholic dad much. I kept that away from them, so they didn't experience that. So they just got to see the fun-loving, happy dad all the time. And Mom was the disciplinarian. I was the one that was the angry person, because Mike and I grew up differently in that way, that I grew up with my parents never seeing them fight but one time. Only one time, remember an argument that they fought in front of us, and my mom threw an ashtray or something at my dad and walked out of the house, and we thought that was over. We thought they were going to get divorced. We'd never seen a fight. We had such weird conceptions of what a happy marriage is. You don't fight. And Mike grew up with an angry alcoholism and some fights after, they were drinking and stuff and yelling, I believe. And so when we got married, I just thought a wife takes care of everybody, makes everybody happy. You don't fight, you don't argue. And when I would confront Mike, like try to have a good discussion with him or whatever, he would explain himself away, and I'd usually be apologizing at the end of it. And so I realized to stop confronting, because I'm just imagining these things, or, he's working hard to support us. I'm at home taking care of the kids and taking care of certain things, the bills and all that. But he provided the paycheck, and I just needed to be a good wife. And Mike was that he was not going to have those arguments at home, or those fights and stuff. So it was a very quiet household when things weren't going good. That's where the silent treatment came along. I would stuff every emotion, every anger, everything. And it would, of course, come out at somebody, and it would come out usually at the kids. I'd get angry for them for spilling their milk or doing something like kids do. And it was just, and Mike would get angry at other things. But we weren't angry at each other, because in our situation at this point, Mike, as he said, was on all kinds of different anxiety pills, depression pills. He was suicidal. I thought I could push him over the edge, and I would be the responsible part. If he committed suicide, it would be all my fault because I pushed him over the edge, and all that kind of stuff. So I walked on eggshells. If you've ever walked on eggshells, it's very hard. They're usually going to break. And so, I worked so hard. But those silent treatments got longer and longer and harder. And the boys, I just really do what we do. I poured myself into being the best mom, the best wife, best cook, the best house cleaner. If I just did this better, I became the school mom. I became the club, the Boy Scout leader. I became the church room mom, all those things. The crafts fair at school, I chaired that. I got myself so busy, in Al-Anon we have, when you get busy, you get better. Well, I was getting busy the wrong way, and I just got worse. But I was ignoring everything. I wasn't addressing anything that was going on at home. I was trying to fix everything. Mike would have these problems, and I would always give him an answer. Because, see, I grew up with, you need to know how to fix everything. You just need to know how to fix it. You should know. And so when Mike would come with an issue, I've got this with my mom, or this with my dad, how do I deal with this? I'd always give him an answer. Sometimes it would work, sometimes it wouldn't. But I always had an answer. I knew how to fix things. That's the way I was raised. If you didn't know it, you made it up. And it sounded good anyway. And so, we didn't have the Google stuff and all that kind of stuff. You can look up this stuff you can do now. And I was trying to figure out Mike's behavior. It wasn't making sense. He was going to counselors, he was going to therapists, he was doing all that stuff. And everything was still crazy. At least I was getting crazier too. And of course, there wasn't anything wrong with me. So, I was going to church, I was doing this. I couldn't see, I was trying to be the perfect person, I thought. And I was just controlling everybody and everything and managing everything and everybody. And things were just falling apart. And I knew something was wrong in the marriage. And Mike started doing those crazy things like cutting down trees and, telling me when he told me he was going to come home, he was going to shoot his dad's car. God did for me what I couldn't do for myself. He ended up giving me no words, no answer. And I said, I don't know what to do. You really need to get more help. This is serious, Please go get help. And he did, and they sent us to the addictionologist, and I got to go with them, and I got to listen to some little cassette tape, and it was talking about all the stuff that was going on in my house, and I kept thinking, how do they know? How are they, they got all these, are they miking my house or something? I thought, Dad, that's what's going on in my house. And he had to answer those questions or whatever it was that they answered, and the guy came out and says, it's easy, he's an alcoholic. And I went, I just wanted to be cheer. I went, thank you for giving me an answer. I didn't know what was wrong. I thought I was going crazy. And I was, but, those things that were going on in the household, I thought they could be connected to alcohol, but because I didn't know what alcoholics looked like, because to me, the alcoholic was the bum on the street that didn't have a job. He carried a brown bag with his liquor in it, and he didn't have anything. And we were fine. We had a house. We hadn't lost anything. We were married. There was, none of that was going on. And I had asked him to quit drinking several times. And see, my test for being an alcoholic is if you can stop drinking, you're not an alcoholic. Because he could stop drinking. And you know what happens when you stop drinking and you have no program, you get crazier, and I'd say go back to drinking. Because he could at least, he would calm his nerves, or he was under stress. And I said, just don't do it in front of the kids. Because my son had come home, and it was in 4th grade, and his teacher, he came home one day, and he said, Mom and Dad, I know you and Dad are doing drugs. Not what you want to hear from your 4th grader, because I hadn't done any in a long time. Not since he was born. And Dad was hiding it, I know, so I was like, what are you talking about? And he said, well, they told us in school that alcohol is a drug. Oh, that's easy. We'll just stop. No problem. So I said, Mike, we got to stop. He thinks we're doing drugs and stuff. He doesn't know about those other things, but let's just not drink. So for me, no big deal, not drinking. Well, for Mike, it was a big deal. He was under a lot of stress. He had a lot of pressure at work, and he had all this stuff. So he said, it had been, a couple of weeks or whatever, and he said, I need something to relax. And I just said, well, just don't do it in front of him, go out to the garage. Well, so the hiding became, hiding everywhere before he came home. And, I never knew he was drunk half the time. That's the baffling part. I just knew that he drank it. I knew his parents became different people after they started drinking. His wonderful, sweet little leprechaun of a mom that I loved dearly would call, and she was a different person. And he was a different person. And I'm like, oh, alcohol's changing them. We better stop. I don't want to be changed like that. And so, I'd say, we need to stop. And all those times, he would stop. But the insanity was there. And so he was using other things to cover up when he was trying to not drink. And it was just getting kind of insane. But when they said he was an alcoholic and he needed to go to treatment, I was excited that there was an answer. And they told me, to go to his family week. And it was a few days that my sons and I went into to his treatment center during the day for 3 days and got to learn about alcoholism. And I heard the word enabling. And see, that word for me was helping. I was supposed to help when I grew up. I was just helping him. And little did I know, they said that, enabling was actually killing him, making it worse. It was just prolonging him getting help every time I helped him. And so they gave me my Al-Anon book, my One Day at a Time book, and told me that I had to have signed, they put my name, I had to sign a piece of paper, which I guess they know that if we're such commitment people that, at least I am, if I put my name on a piece of paper, I'm going to do what I said I'm going to do. And so they said I had to go to 4 meetings, I think, or it was probably 6, but I thought 4. And so I thought, okay, I've just got to go to 4 meetings, and they'll give me the secret of how to keep him sober. Because he's an alcoholic and I can keep him sober. We've done that before. And so I went to my first Al-Anon meeting. He was going to his meetings a lot, and I thought, well, I better fulfill my, commitment to go to those meetings. So I went to the first one. It was a very small meeting. A lot of old people, probably my age, were in there, and not very many. It was a very small group, and see, I hadn't taken the cotton out of my ears. I was judging everybody and everything, and all I heard them say is that they had a disease and that they were sick. And I thought, I don't want what they have. I don't have a disease. I'm not the alcoholic. I don't want what they have, because they were talking about their crazies. And I thought, I couldn't see mine. Mine were on the inside. I couldn't see them. And so I thought, well, I've got to go to another meeting. I said I'd go to 4, so I went to another one, and actually this one had the newcomer meeting. And there were several of us newcomers at the time. It was a bigger meeting, and it was wonderful. They explained how we were powerless over that disease and stuff. They explained the disease a little bit more, and we went actually for 6 weeks to that newcomer meeting, and it was wonderful for me. And I thought, great, I'm doing it. And I went to, after those 4, I kept going. They had me hooked. I liked how I felt when I went out of there. These people were talking about stuff that was going on in my household and how I felt, and that I never talked to anybody about it. I never sought counseling. I never did any of that, because you just didn't do that back then. Only crazy people did that back then, and I wasn't the crazy one, surely. I was holding it all together, but not very well. Anyway, I started going to those meetings, and Mike was going to his meetings, and I was seeing that he was getting better, but see, I saw those 12 steps on the wall, and I looked at those and just said, well, yeah, I do that. I believe in God. I've got all that down. I go to confession. I got that. And yeah, it's good. I don't need to make any amends. I've not made any mistakes. Ha, ha, ha. And, and I pray and I meditate and stuff so much, because I went to church. I'd gone back to church when I got my kids. When I had my children, I decided to raise them in the church too, so I was going to church, and I got Mike to go to church a couple of times. I kept thinking that was the problem. He just needed to go back to church when he started going through all that stress and stuff. That's why I took him on the pilgrimage, for 9 days. Thought he'd be healed and stuff. It didn't work, but I kept trying all those little things, and they weren't working. And so going to Al-Anon, I thought, okay, they'll give me the secret how to keep him sober. And so after about, 6 to 9 months, he heard the rigorous honesty part, and it was feeling bad about all that, and got me in that conversation and told me how he'd been unfaithful to me for the last 8 years. And I was not happy, like he thought I might be, okay? It put me in my bottom. That I'm grateful that I finally got a bottom here, because see, I don't know that I'd still be here if it weren't for that experience, because that taught me. I was scared to death because I didn't know that the marriage would survive. I still loved him. I was seeing him grow, and as long as he was going to stay sober, and I told him I'd stay with him. But I didn't know. I sought spiritual counseling, and they told me I could leave the marriage. I had every right to. And I just I still loved the man, and I knew Mike was still in there, that Mike that I married. I wanted him back, and I had hope that AA could bring him back to me. But when I had that bottom for me, I realized it was time for me to start working on me, because the marriage may not survive. And I'd heard enough people say, that they married an alcoholic, they divorced, they married another one, they divorced, they married another one, they just kept marrying alcoholics. And I thought, if this one doesn't work, I'll just probably find another one. I like this one, I want to stay in this marriage. I want to know how to make this one work. Or if it doesn't work, I need to work on me and be the best person that I can be for these kids. I had 2 boys at the time, they were 8 and 11. And I got a sponsor. I started working the steps. I got involved with going to more than one meeting a week. Started going to lots of meetings. I was hearing, that you found the recovery in the service work. I started becoming a part of the group. Mike and I started going to meetings together where they had Al-Anon and AA in separate rooms at the same time. We developed child care rooms at the meetings that we were in because there were several of us that had young children. We worked that out so we could take our kids, so it didn't matter. There was no excuse not to have it. My kids got involved in Alateen. They loved it. I'm so grateful for Alateen. They got to learn these steps. I remember studying at night, instead of saying their prayers and stuff, when we'd go to say prayers at night, they would recite the 12 steps. They were so excited they had them memorized, and that was their prayers, and I loved it. And we were just a recovering family. It was working out okay. And as Mike said, some things happened, and he tried to make amends to me, but a letter didn't suffice for me. Just words on a paper didn't suffice. And I told him what I needed for an amends, and he wasn't willing to do that because his sponsor kept saying, no, you can't do that. And my sponsor was saying, just keep going one day at a time. And I was willing just to stay in the marriage one day at a time. And that's how I made it through. And lots of hand-holding from my sponsor working the steps on me, trying to figure out my part in all of this and what I could do to be a better person. And life was getting good, and finally we got to the point where Mike realized that if the marriage was going to survive at all, he was going to finally have to give me my amends the way I wanted them, that I knew that I needed to continue on in this marriage. And he did, and it's just what I needed. And I just knew that's what I needed. And from that point on, I felt we could build on the marriage. We weren't building, we were just hanging on by our fingernails, and just acting as if, really. And I was raising these kids, and Mike was we was working hard, and we were doing our best. And then all of a sudden, our 8th grade son, the youngest one at the time, got kicked out of school, like Mike said, and I had my second sponsor at this time. It was like probably 10 years into the, no, not quite 10 years, maybe 5 or 6 years into recovery. And when he got kicked out, I was determined to get him back into a school, because he got kicked out of a public school. And we went to all the private schools in the city trying to get them to admit him and let him graduate 8th grade. And we weren't having any luck. And of course, my sponsor at the time was being wonderful and saying, listening to all my whining and stuff. And it had been almost a month at this time. And he was working at my sister's, at her farm, trying to help her out so Mike and I would continue to go to work. And it was getting to be about Christmas time, and I was working in the school system, and I decided since he wasn't going to be able to get into school, I was just going to have to homeschool him so he could graduate. And I'd called my sponsor one more time, and this was like on a Monday, and I was complaining about, what am I going to do, what am I going to do, what am I going to do? And she said, Diane, you need to let go and let God. And I was like, how's God going to get him in school? I've done all the legwork. What are you talking about? She said, just let go and let God. And see, all this time, I was still doing God's in charge of the wars and stuff. I'm in charge of Nashville, maybe, whatever. My family, at least, and that kind of stuff. And I'm like, God doesn't want to bother with this. This is crazy. And she said, just let go and let God. So I did. I said, okay, God's got till Friday. Hey, if he's God, he can do it by Friday. I was arrogant, what can I say? And I was like, well, I had to make a decision by Friday whether to tell my boss at work that I was going to quit, because I was going to homeschool him. And I didn't want that because I knew we would clash and all that stuff. But anyway, I said, okay, I'll give God till Friday. Thursday night, we got a call, and that little bit of window I gave God in came through. I had an appointment the next day. We had an appointment with the Alternative Learning Center, and to go, interview with our son, and he got admitted on Friday. So that's the window. I finally let God in to do something, and that showed me, God didn't do what I wanted him to do, though. He gave him in the wrong school, but I was willing. I said Friday, and he came through. I was willing, and he had to be in this school for one whole year, and I thought, okay, God, at the end of the year, we'll see if you made a good decision or not. I still didn't know that it was the right choice. At the end of that year, it was the right choice. God showed me, it was just miracles and stuff, and I let that window open a little bit bigger. I thought, okay, God, you really do know what you're doing, I have to give you this little bit, open up. And so I did, and I was able to give him a lot more things. But anyway, our son graduated 8th grade and went on to high school, and then we thought, okay, great, he's fixed. He actually got an award at that school for the least person likely to come back. They were wrong, but he didn't go back to that school, but he did other things. And he was the youngest one, and we rocked on, and 4 years later, he's 18, and he's not quite, he's in between his senior year, and he wants to move out with a friend. And I had you guys had walked me through so many things, and I knew, it was God's will whether he was going to make it or not on his own, and whether he went to school or not, that was none of my business. I actually said, I wish you well. We can't stop you. You're 18. You're going to either make it or you're not. I'll be praying for you, and I hope it works out for you. But if it doesn't, you're going to learn. I know there'll be a lesson in it for you. So we let him go, and he went his senior year, and he was in an apartment. And Mike and I like to attend a certain conference every February, and we were at this conference in February, and it was a 4-day conference like this one. It started on Thursdays, and it went all the way through, and it was a wonderful conference like this. We got to hear people at that conference at that time where they'd been to the pen, and they found AA in the pen and all the stuff. They were horrible, and gone to jail and all that stuff. And it's just what I needed to hear that weekend, because we came home from that weekend, and our youngest son was at our house, and our oldest son, who was in college at the time, was at our house too. And we're like, what are you guys doing here? And they said, well, come on in. And we're like, come sit down. And we're like, another one, oh, we don't want to hear this. But I'm like, okay, what happened? And why are y'all here? And they're like, and the youngest son said, oh, well, on Thursday night I got arrested with 3 felonies and a misdemeanor and went to jail. This was Sunday, and I'm like, well, why didn't you call? And he said, well, you always told me if I got myself into trouble, I had to get myself out. Now, I don't know if I ever said that or not, but that's what he heard. And I'm so grateful that I was in Huntsville and he was in Nashville, and it all happened then, because I don't know what I would have done if I was in Nashville and he'd called me. I'm just grateful he didn't, and he got to work it out. And his older brother went the next day and rounded up his money, bail, and got him out of jail. And he said, we said, well, we love you. I'm sorry that happened to you, but I know it's going to be okay. Because I'd heard people say that if he had to go to jail, he might find help there. So I was willing for him to go to jail and stuff. And I said, this is on you. And he found the lawyer. We sat outside the lawyer's office when he went. He paid for the lawyer. All his savings he'd had ever since he was a baby. We had him save money, and that was gone. That went all to the lawyer. But he got on probation after that. And it was his first big offense because he was 18. And he had a 2-year probation. He asked to come home. And I didn't know he'd even dropped out of school. I had no idea, because I wasn't checking up on him anymore. And he, had told us he did. And I said, well, you're welcome to come home, but you got to go back to school. And there's no drugs or alcohol. This is a sober house in our house. And so he agreed to that, and he stayed and lived with us for 2 years. He went to community college, graduated and went to community college, and for that year, and then he moved out to California, where he's been ever since, 20 years later or so. And That's been a rocky road for him. It was a great experience having him, at our house, sober, for at least as far as I know, for those 2 years. And, he got to see us. He knew AA and Al-Anon was working. We never did stop. And he moved out to California, and I got to pray for him and pray for him and pray for him, because he was living on couches. He was living wherever with friends. He was doing things that, it wasn't any of my business what he was doing. I figured it was his path, and I just kept praying for him, because he's had it rough and back and forth. And I remember going to a place of, surrender was a big part of this. I remember surrendering my marriage when I thought I was trying to hold it all together for so many years, and I finally, the thing that worked for me is surrendering my marriage to God, and said, if this is to be end in divorce, I accept it, if that's your will. That was a big move. I surrendered my son. I said, he's yours, he's not mine. If he's going to die out there, he's going to die. I have no control. There's such a release when you surrender. It's like I just pray, and that's all. And he's doing okay. He's got a year not drinking right now. I don't know what else he's doing, but he stood up at a year at a talk that Mike gave out there, that he had just celebrated a year of not drinking, which is great. He's doing it his way. He knows AA's out there. He was court-ordered to go to AA when he was younger and stuff, and he knows it works for us, but he knows where to go, and it's none of my business what he does. And I don't tell him to go to AA. We don't tell him that. We just say, we love you, we're praying for you. You'll figure it out. It's going to work out for you, okay? And he's had to ask us for money here and there, and fortunately he asked his dad and not me lately, and it was great. Dad said, I can't do it. He said, you got a lot of stuff. Sell the stuff. Go get a good job, because he was doing all other kind of things. And he said, you're going to figure it out. You're smart. You can do it. And he did. He went and got a job. He sold his stuff. He got a job that he has loved ever since, and he has soared. And had we given him money and made it easy for us, he wouldn't have done that. He is so grateful that he's got that job. He loves it, and he's talented, and it's just a perfect fit for him. And I think, he's on the path, but, we had to stop enabling him. Oldest son, I got to wrap this up. Oldest son, at that same year, he had gotten engaged the November before and came to Mike, I believe, and called him, and he said, how do y'all feel about being grandparents? And we're like, yeah, we'd love to be someday. This was February, and he said, how about August? And my kind of Al-Anon flew out the window for a minute, and I said, well, y'all want to move the wedding up to this spring or something? And they said, no, why? And we're like, oh, just thought. See, in my family of origin, you would have been married, right then and there. You would have gone and found a priest. But they was like, no, we're going to get married when we said we were going to get married. And we're like, okay, y'all going to figure this out. And they moved back. My son moved back and quit college after that second year and started raising a family. He got a job and has raised that daughter ever since. And they got married when they were supposed to get married. I had a granddaughter. Never had a little girl. I got to dote on this little girl and have a whole little room, all dolls and pink and fluffy stuff and all that good stuff that I didn't get to do with the boys, and spend every weekend and summer vacations and spring vacations and all that stuff. Took her everywhere on all the things because the dad and mom were working hard and just loved on that. It was like I got my little girl and stuff, and it was wonderful. I took her shopping. We'd do all the girly stuff and just have fun. I loved being a grandma, and it all worked out because I had you. I had Al-Anon, and somebody that had walked that road before me, and I've had sponsees now, and I've gotten to go through the same thing. It's funny how that works, and I scared me to death. I prayed so hard that was going to work out, and it did. It's always in God's plan. God's plan is always the right one. And I just got to get out of the way and let God work through us. And ended up being in high school. That marriage ended 4 years later, and my son and daughter-in-law went through the most amazing divorce I've ever seen. They wrote it all out on a piece of paper, agreed on it, and gave it to a lawyer and said, file it. And that was it. And they co-parented that daughter, and we stayed connected to that daughter-in-law. And we said, just because you're divorcing her, we're not. She's still the mom to our granddaughter, and I'm going to love her, because her parents had moved away, and we were the only parents that she had in Nashville. And she always called on us when she needed anything, even after they were divorced. And she got married a couple of years ago again, and asked Mike and I to walk her down the aisle. That's what this program can do, We would have Thanksgiving dinner, and it would be my son and his girlfriend, my ex-daughter-in-law and her boyfriend, and the granddaughter, and it was just wonderful. It was so cool. We got to really see that. My son remarried, got to go through another divorce. That new wife didn't like sitting down with the old wife, and that didn't work out, and didn't want her. And we kept her in our Christmas pictures with her new husband and stuff, and she didn't like that. But I'm like, she's still part of the family. But anyway, this is what this program can do for us. And last but not least, I'm going to round this up because life keeps happening. You keep showing me how to really love people. That granddaughter, in high school, I continued to shop with her and everything, and she ended up wanting to shop in the boys' department, and that was fine with me. When she'd go to prom, I'd go buy her a tux, and we supported her no matter what. She would end up going to our meetings with us all the time, this little one, and she always found the worst alcoholics. So I'm saving her a seat because she loved on the worst ones, I swear. And she would just pick them out, and I'd say, oh, God, I'm saving your seat. But anyway, she would shop and all this stuff, and she cut her hair like a boy, and she was just, we still did all the fun stuff that was doing. She was in the band, and at the end, she graduated and was going to graduate, and we were going to have a party for her. And she came over and she said, because we were going to do a little banner of, school to college and a picture of her and her name and all that, because my son was doing printing at the time banners and stuff, so he could do that for us. And her mom came over and said, don't put her name on it. And I went, why? And she said, she'll show you. And so she came over and she talked to us, and I'm Dee Dee, and that's Bapu. And she came over and she said, Dee Dee and Bapu, I just want to tell you, I don't want you to put my name on the banner. And we said, okay, but why? Is there a reason? She said, yeah, I'm a trans man, and I have been at school. They only know me by a guy's name. And I'm going to graduate in a black cap and gown like the guys, with a guy's name is going to be on my, certificate. And I don't want you to be surprised and stuff. And we're like, okay, we're cool with that. Thank you for telling us. We love you anyway. And stuff, I'd seen the changes, and I was just waiting for her to tell us what was going on. And the hardest thing about that has been changing the pronouns, that's all. And she went off, she wanted to go to college, or he wanted to go to college as a guy. So he had the top surgery, and he paid for that all himself. And his parents were really, thank you for Alatine. Her dad was like, she was wanting to tell us all these last few years, but wasn't, and she kept telling Dad and Mom, would y'all tell them, please? Tell Dee Dee and Bapu about me. They said, no, you got to do that. That's your job. It's about you. And so that's when she finally got the courage to do that. But anyway, went off to college, and that was great. A year and a half in, COVID hit. And Dad his dad had already moved out to California because he works remotely, and said that he'd rather him come out to California and ski with him, vacations. He didn't need to be in Nashville because we were in Nashville and Mom was in Nashville if he wanted to come home. And so COVID hit. He had to quit his job. He quit college. He couldn't do that. And he wanted to come home to Nashville, but his dad had moved away and his mom had gotten married and only lived in a one-bedroom house, and that wasn't very comfortable for him to be there. So he asked us to move in with us. And which we said, of course. Which was he lived with us for 18 months, and I'm so grateful because I got to see her as him. I got to see that transition. I got to see inside him. Because it was hard for me, because I grieved the loss of my granddaughter. That granddaughter, I really did. But I got to see he's the same person. He's just changed some outward appearances. That's all. His soul is the same. And he's happy. Got to see him happier than he's been in a long time. He suffers from a lot of anxiety and depression. Lived with us for 18 months. We got to be close again, but the pronouns came easier. And I said, I'm going to screw up. I still screw up names all the time. And I'm going to mess up a lot. And please give me some grace, and he does. We just laugh about it when I do. And after 18 months, he talked about moving to Portland. He couldn't wait to move to Portland. We said, okay, it's time. I think you're ready, and you saved up all your money by living with us, and because he worked and all that. And he moved out to Portland, and he was there for a year, and it was under a really bad situation where he was. And the homeless situation was, camps were all around him, and he wasn't comfortable being outside. He was really isolating with his friends that had moved out there with him. He was suffering again his anxiety and depression and wasn't getting any support. And his dad went up and just picked him up and brought him to Tahoe with him and set him up in a little unit. And they're together now, close, and he's setting him up, and he's happy again. And it's such a good move. I just have to keep trusting in my higher power's got a plan for all these people. But the main thing is that, I used to, everything I did was out of fear before I came here. Today, I get to act out of love. And I want to close, because I'm past my time, but with a saying from our One Day at a Time book. It's August 6th. And it says, "This is a day which God has given into my hands. If I can only realize what a tremendous gift it is, I would use every moment of it to make my life more serene, more rewarding." And I'll skip down to, "I would notice interesting things, the expressions on people's faces, the plant growing on my windowsill, the grace and charm of a child, an arrangement of clouds. Today there are wonders all around me if I will open my eyes and enjoy them." And at the bottom it says, "Today I can begin a new way of using my minutes and hours, a new way of looking at my surroundings and the circumstances of my life. I will make this day one I can look back upon with pleasure and satisfaction and a preparation for the days to come. Today is all the time that I have." And I want to thank you for giving me today. And I look forward for everybody else.